the ghost plane. We've heard the term before, but Flight MH370 really seemed to vanish into thin air. As we said in our opening titles, a Boeing 777 disappeared over the Indian Ocean with 239 people on board. Now, what happened next is just as bizarre. You might think there would have been a crash site, some debris, some answers, but not here. Nothing. No sign of a crash to this day. So how does a massive aircraft just disappear without a trace? What really happened to MH370? Now, if you want the full story, there's an excellent documentary called MH370, The Plane That Disappeared. It's hosted by one of my favorites, the lovely and brilliant Mariana Spring. It's a superb watch. Tonight, we'll hit the highlights, try to sift through the chaos, and cover what we now know, what we think we know, and perhaps what we should know. First, let's go back to that fateful night. It was Saturday, March 8th, 2014. Most of the passengers were traveling from China to their homeland, celebrating the Chinese New Year. They boarded MH370 in Kuala Lumpur, one of the busiest airports in the world. It's certainly very busy. Here's some CCTV footage from inside the terminal showing all the hustle and bustle before the flight. As we said earlier, among the travelers were two pilots, both employed by Malaysia Airlines. They joined the other 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board. They took off at 12:34 a.m. Up in the sky, MH370 joined other planes crisscrossing the globe. All were being tracked by radar, satellite, and phone. It was 2014. For heaven's sake, there was no hiding anything. Well, that's what you'd think. We'll play out the timeline as we know it. At 1:19 a.m., when the plane was over the Gulf of Thailand, the pilot contacted Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control. Their conversation was routine. Both pilots were well rested. The weather was perfect, nothing to suggest disaster. At 1:21 a.m., the transponders switched off. The pilot put the plane on autopilot and made a sharp turn back over the Malay Peninsula. The last satellite ping placed them over the Indian Ocean. If it crashed, it must have been under the wave. But there was no sign of a crash. No life rafts, no life jackets, no boaties, nothing. It was as if the plane had evaporated, and now the theories started appearing. Was this an accident? Had the pilots fallen asleep? Had the plane caught fire? Was it mechanical or was this intentional, even sinister? Was it hijacking or pilot suicide? This was unknown territory, unprecedented. In the 70 years before this, planes sometimes went missing. There were crashes, but always there was something to explain what happened. Sometimes there was wreckage. Sometimes human error, mechanical failure, or bad weather. But MH370 was different. This plane was invisible. It left no trace. It was the first time in history that an aircraft could not be found after disappearing from radar. For months, the search was frantic, but fruitless. The area searched was vast, approximately 46,000 square miles. It was painstaking work, and it was frustrating because crucial time was being lost. There were worries that if the plane had crashed, it could have sunk in shallow water. If so, divers would need to locate it. Divers don't typically work at those depths. And yet the effort was immense, despite the difficulties. But as time went on, focus shifted to new areas based on analysis of the available data. In late April 2014, authorities changed course. They believed the plane had flown much further south, probably over the remote islands of the Indian Ocean. Ships and planes hunted for weeks on end, but still there was nothing. And then questions began to be asked. Why had the plane flown so far south? What was it doing over the remote ocean? And why had it stayed in the air for so long? Where had it gone? Now, over the years since various pieces of debris have been found, most of which confirmed the plane's identity. But the location of the wreck remains a mystery. Maybe it's broken up on the seabed, or maybe it's hidden in a canyon. Investigators are convinced it's in the sea. They believe the pilots flew the plane for about 6 hours once they deviated from their flight path. They drained the fuel, and then the plane plunged into the sea. It must have been quite a sight, a huge plane engulfed by darkness and waves. But there was no evidence of a crash. There were no lifeboats, no life jacket. It was as if the plane and its occupants had vanished into thin air. So what do we think we know? Well, we can tell you exactly what happened to the plane. We know it flew for a total of 8 hours and 19 minutes. We also know the plane changed direction twice during that flight. It flew from Kuala Lumpur to the northwest before turning around and heading back to the west. The final leg was over the southern Indian Ocean. We know that because satellite data showed that the plane was making contact with an internet service provider over the ocean. We also know that the engines were running throughout the flight. This is known because the plane had made contact with a ground station operated by British satellite firm. The data revealed that at least one engine was running for most of the journey. That's a lot that we know, and yet it raises more questions. Why did the plane turn back? Who made that decision? The pilots or someone else? And why were the engines kept on? That's what the investigation report said. This is what's in the public domain. But we suspect there's much more that's not known, and this is the problem. With every theory, there's a piece of evidence that just doesn't fit. Theory 1. Hijacking. Why did no terrorist group claim responsibility? No group wanted to upset China, so they acted silently. But this doesn't explain why the pilots would comply. Theory 2. Pilot suicide. The pilot had flown the plane close to his home several times before landing. But again, this doesn't explain why the plane flew so far south. Theory 3, fire or mechanical failure. Would the plane have flown for 6 hours with one engine on fire? It seems unlikely, but the Malaysian government believes this is the cause of the crash. Theory 4, military intercept. But why would any country shoot down a civilian plane and cover it up? Still, one theory persists, albeit in slightly different forms. Some believe the plane was intentionally flown to a remote location and ditched. The pilots knew exactly where they were going. Others believe the plane was intercepted by a U.S. drone or Russian submarine and destroyed. But which one, or perhaps neither? We'll never know unless more evidence emerges. But this is what we can say for sure. The plane's disappearance was the biggest peacetime aviation mystery in history. It was unprecedented. Never before had a plane with that many people on board vanished into thin air, only to leave behind bits of debris on faraway shores. Yes, planes go missing, but usually we find the wreck. We find some answers. But this was different. The question everyone was asking is, can a plane carrying almost 250 people just disappear? Well, yes. It seems it can. Some believe the jet was deliberately flown into the ocean. Others that it was shot down. But where is it? That's the big question. Maybe it's in the southern Indian Ocean. Maybe not. Maybe the world hasn't been looking in the right place. Maybe one day we will uncover the truth. When we do, it will be one of the biggest stories in living memory. Tonight, we're merely scratching the surface of the MH370. Tragedy. There's much more to this story. We've barely touched on the conspiracy theories, much less the blame game that emerged between Malaysia and China. But maybe this isn't enough. Maybe we should ponder what we do know rather than speculate on the unknown. It's tempting to go down all sorts of avenues, but it might be wiser to stick to the facts. This is a tragedy that defies explanation. The official investigation concluded that a deliberate decision was made to divert the plane from its original flight path, and it was those actions that caused the plane to run out of fuel and crash. In other words, someone knew where the plane was going, but nobody has ever come forward with definitive proof of what happened. The truth, it seems, is out there somewhere. Perhaps one day we'll uncover it.